12.4 goes over square roots of variable expressions. When we're working with these variable expressions underneath the radical, you're not only taking the root of the number, but also the variable that's raised to powers. When you do these, you want to keep in mind your index with all of these. If your index is, if you're doing the square root, your index is automatically a 2. Any other will have that little index number on the radical symbol. You will divide each power by the index. Whatever you have left over after you divide it will stay underneath the radical. Whatever it gives you that divides out will go out front of the radical. If we look at example 1a, we're just simplifying the square root of 196y squared. That 196 is 13 times 13, and that y squared, that 2 gets divided by 2 because your invisible index is a 2. You have two 13s, so you pull one of those out. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that's y to the first power. You multiply both of these, and you have 13y. For example B, we have the square root of 36x to the 8th power. So we're going to do the square root of that 36, which is 6 times 6. And that x to the 8th power is going to be x to the 8th power divided by our index, which is 2. Your two 6's pair up, so you pull 1 out. The 8 divided by 2 gives us 4, so that's x to the 4th power. We multiply these two, and we just have 6x to the 4th power as our answer. For example C, we have the square root of m squared minus 6m plus 9. For this one, that m squared minus 6m plus 9 does factor to become the square root of m minus 3 squared. Because you have this m minus 3 squared, that index of 2 is going to divide with the power of 2, and it'll cancel each other out, so that way it's just m minus 3. For example D, we have the square root of 18a cubed. Another way of doing these is to separate this as two square roots, so you'd have the square root of 18 times the square root of a cubed. Our index is 2 on both of these, so when we find the factors of 18, we would have 3 times 6. The 6 is 3 times 2. Those 3's pair up. The 2 stays under, so this is going to be 3 square root 2. For that a cubed, we're going to divide that 3 by our index, which is 2. This gives us a to the first power with a remainder of 1. That remainder of 1 is going to stay underneath the radical. So this is the same thing as saying a square root a. We're going to multiply this by 3 square root 2. Whatever's outside is going to multiply together. Whatever's inside will multiply together. So this is going to give us 3 times a, which is 3a. And the square root of 2 times the square root of a is the square root of 2a. So 3a square root 2a. For our next set of examples, we're solving equations. When we solve these equations, we want to make sure to include every possible solution. So when we isolate that x squared, or that variable raised to a power, we're going to take that power and use it as our index to take that root of both sides. When we're taking the even root, so the square root, the 4th root, the 6th root, you want to make sure you put that plus or minus in front of your answer. And that's only when you're doing it to both sides of the equation. So for example 2, we have 9x squared is equal to 64. For this one, we want to get x squared by itself, so we're going to divide each side by the 9. This leaves us with x squared is equal to 64 over 9. Because our power is 2 on that x, we're going to take the square root of both sides. Remember, when you take the square root of both sides, you want that plus or minus in front of your answer, and you're taking the square root of the numerator over the square root of the denominator. The square root of that numerator is 8. The square root of the 9 is 3. So we have x is equal to plus or minus 8 over 3. For our next example, which is the last example in this lesson, we have 16x squared is equal to 81. So again, we're going to divide each side by the 16 to get x squared by itself. We have x squared is equal to 81 over 16. We're going to take the square root of both sides. That cancels out the power on the right side with x, so it's just x. We're going to put the plus or minus in front of our answer. The square root of 81 is 9. The square root of 16 is 4. So we just have x is equal to plus or minus 9 over 4.